Austen Lane, ESPN 690, giving you guys my three takeaways from the game. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of positive to take away, but I got a job to do, so here we go. Takeaway number one is obviously Nick Foles. Jaguars are down 10-0. Foles comes out, throws an absolute dart, an absolute dime to DJ Chark about 40 yards, dropped it right in on him in the end zone. Jaguars score. It's 10-7, whole new ball game. And all of a sudden, everyone notices that Foles is hurt and goes to the locker room. Turns out that he has broken his clavicle, also known as the collarbone. And usually with those kind of injuries, you're talking about at least 6 to 8 weeks. So it's not a good look for the Jacksonville Jaguars right now. And Nick Foles, after throwing such a promising throw, a little positive from that. In comes Gardner Minshew, the rookie QB, taken deep in the draft. Kind of had an up and down preseason, comes in, goes 22 for 25 with 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. And really the interception wasn't even his fault. So I thought he had a good day. I thought he showed a lot of promise, a lot of poise. John DeFilippo did him a lot of favors by easing him into the offense a little bit, getting the run game going, then setting up the play action to the short to intermediate passes to gain his confidence a little bit. So I thought Gardner Minshew, for all things considered, looked really good. If you're the Jacksonville Jaguars, now you have to ask yourselves, where do you go from here in terms of the backup quarterback? There's not a lot of guys right now in free agency. Sam Bradford, who's been out for a little bit, definitely has some injury concerns. You got a guy like Landry Jones, who just signed a deal with the XFL. I'm not sure how that actually works, where if he's tied down to that XFL deal like he would be in Canada, or if he can opt out of that XFL deal at any time. So Landry Jones, former backup quarterback from the Pittsburgh Steelers, another guy. And then Brock Osweiler, a guy who's journeyed a little bit from Denver, from Miami. He's also available right now, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a few options to go there for the backup quarterback spot if you're not confident with Gardner Minshew. But one would think that with Foles probably being out an extended period of time now, you at least have to bring somebody else in to probably back up Gardner Minshew and get him ready for Houston. My second takeaway was the Jags defense. This entire week I talked about how the Jaguars defense could definitely keep the team in it. I understand the Kansas City Chiefs are a high-powered offense, but I thought the Jaguars had the pieces at defense to stop them, especially on the defensive line. You're talking about a defensive line today that had 0 sacks, 0 turnovers. And it doesn't all fall on the defensive line. Yes, there's a giant goose egg in the sack category right now. But if you watch that game, Patrick Mahomes was getting that ball out, within 2 to 3 seconds. And the reason that was because you saw the Kansas City Chiefs, and Andy Reid is the mastermind of game planning for this. What the Kansas City Chiefs did is a lot like the Los Angeles Rams do now, where they ran a lot of trips and they ran a lot of bunch formations, but it was all tight. And when you run those tight bunches, those tight trips, or empty backfields like that, it does a couple things. Number one, it tightens the defense down a little bit in the backfield. So whether there's crossing patterns or things like that, it provides a little extra chaos for the guys trying to cover the receivers. And in doing that, it also makes the receivers kind of pop open a little faster, so the Jaguars pass rush couldn't get to them. You saw a couple times Sammy Watkins had a couple big gains just off a little crossing route, but it was out of that tight bunch formation. And when I analyze the Houston Texans right now, I think the Houston Texans are capable of doing the exact same thing that the Kansas City Chiefs just did. The Houston Texans have a great receiving core. You have guys like, obviously, DeAndre Hopkins. You have Kiki Kuti. You have Will Fuller, when he's healthy, is a big asset. And they just got Stills from Miami. And Stills is kind of the jack of all trades, kind of like that gadget guy that you can do a lot of things with. And then you have Duke Johnson catching balls out of the backfield, who I think is an upgrade from what you saw from the back city from the Kansas City Chiefs. So, the Jaguars are taking on a Houston Texans team now that'll come in on a little more short notice because they play at night. But all things considered, you got to bring your P's and Q's because the Houston offense could feast just like the Kansas City offense just did. And then for my third takeaway, I have to go with the discipline. Miles Jax is the captain. He's the field collar. He's the general of that defense. And I understand. Listen, I spent some time on the field, and I'm all for getting behind your guys, getting in somebody else's face, having your players back. That's what it's all about. That's what being a captain's about. But you can't throw that punch. When we watched the Bills game last year with Leonard Fournette, it kind of taught you that you cannot throw that punch, get thrown out of the game, because number one, it's a distraction to your team, and number two, you're not out there to help your team out at the same time. So, with Miles Jack, it wasn't a good look. It wasn't a good look for the Jaguars organization. It wasn't a good look for him, and it wasn't a good look for him being the captain, having that C on his chest. And there's a couple other penalties, too, that were a little foolish. I remember the penalty with Ronnie Harrison where it was 2nd and 6 by the Jaguars goal line. They stop him. It's 3rd and 6. You're going to hold Kansas City to a field goal, and Ronnie Harrison gets a taunting penalty. All of a sudden, it's 1st down. Chiefs score a touchdown. The game's well out of reach then. It's just plays like that. It's the discipline. And obviously when you're talking about discipline, it starts with the top to the bottom. It starts with the front office, starts with the coaching, and it trickles on down to the players, and it goes from the coaches to the captains to the players. And unfortunately, we saw some undisciplined stuff out there today. And then obviously something I've been talking about the whole time is the penalties. We have 10 penalties today with the Jacksonville Jaguars. You can't have that. You can't be a playoff team and have 10 penalties a game. You just can't do it. We saw it in the preseason, and I guess we all thought that would be cleaned up. But today, unfortunately, having 10 penalties again, your first regular season game, that has to be cleaned up as well. Because if you look at the playoff teams last year, now, yes, the Kansas City Chiefs led the league in penalties last year. But guess what? The Jaguars don't have the Kansas City Chief offense to back that up right now. And if you look at the other teams that made the playoffs last year, whether it's the Saints, the Rams, or the Patriots, those teams don't commit a lot of penalties. Those teams are smart teams, well-coached teams, and disciplined teams. And if the Jaguars want to get, at least win a division or go to the playoffs, you got to be smart. You got to be disciplined. That's been my 3 things. So I don't have more positive news, but like I said, I got to do my job, man. So see you guys next week.